Tú vas con un amigo.
With my friend.
Que fue tu novio. Tú estás loca. ¿En qué mundo tú vives?
Daniele is once again taking things too far and disrespecting Yohan. She's doing her best to make her husband feel inferior and emasculated. It may only be day 2 of their lives together in the Dominican Republic, but already I don't know how much longer Yohan can take it.
Entiendo, pero tú tienes una esposa americana.
Tú eres una mujer casada. Eso es mucha falta de respeto de tu parte.
Yohan seems to be getting better at standing up for himself, and he's absolutely right. Respect is what it comes down to, and Daniele seems to have absolutely no respect for him or his culture. We've seen it time and time again, but in this episode, Yohan finally calls her out on it. But before we get to all the drama surrounding Daniele and her ex, let's rewind back to the start of the episode. So when we last saw Yohan and Daniele, they were fighting over gender roles. Daniele had just arrived in the DR to live permanently, but she hadn't yet seen the apartment that Yohan had rented for them. Well, when we join them in this episode, it's the next morning, and Daniele is unpacking her 10 suitcases. Her stuff is literally everywhere, and Yohan is just sat on the couch, buffering.
As someone who's very grounded in practices and like order and organization, I'm struggling a lot with the fact that my is all over the place.
I mean, this just shows how Daniele lacks any form of self-awareness. She definitely doesn't come across as being grounded and organised. In fact, it's the complete opposite. She's been a hot mess since we first met her, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say an organised person probably wouldn't run away from all of her problems, file for bankruptcy, leave all of her packing for the last moment, wouldn't have rocked up to the DR with 10 suitcases without telling anyone, and she certainly wouldn't have forgotten to hand in her licence plates before leaving the country. And don't even get me started on the fact that she thinks she's grounded. A grounded person wouldn't look down their nose at everyone in the new country she's chosen to live in.
I did not turn in my license plates. I was supposed to do this on the way to the airport, so I don't know how that's happening. Do they even like have mailboxes in the Dominican Republic?
Yes, Daniele, the Dominican Republic, a country with a population of over 11 million people, does have a postal service. Okay, maybe she's trying to be funny here, but she constantly has this attitude that everything in the DR fails to live up to her standards. But here's the thing, Daniele, rather than looking down your nose at everything, why not acknowledge the fact that it's a developing country? That's one of the main attractions that drew you to it, the fact that you can take advantage of the low cost of living. Maybe quit ridiculing and expecting everything to be on par with American standards.
I don't know that Yohan and I can live here long term. We need to figure out resources and how we're gonna split our finances, but it's fine for us to start our lives here.
Now, judging by Daniele's reaction to everything in the DR, I'm kind of disappointed that we didn't get to see Daniele's initial reaction when she first saw the apartment Yohan rented for them. You've got to imagine a late night, exhausted Daniele after hours of travelling, coming off the back of a disagreement about who was going to drive, probably would have had a few things to nitpick about. And even the next morning, although she admits it's more or less perfect, she really can't help herself. She has to take a jab or two at Yohan about its flaws.
This is a nice apartment. Like, I'm very happy with how clean it is and where it's located, how close it is to the beach. The beds are way too big for these rooms, so I'm gonna have to remove this bed.
See, that didn't take long, did it? Daniele has to find something to complain about. She says that she needs to move the beds in order to make room for an office. Now, presumably, when she says office, what she means is a space to do her online yoga classes. That's how she's previously told us she intends to earn money. But that raises an interesting question. How are Daniele and Yohan going to afford this apartment? Who's going to be paying for it? You'll probably recall that last time they were looking at apartments, the issue of who's going to pay for it caused a big argument. So I'm not sure if they've come to some sort of resolution to that. They haven't actually said. But for now at least, Daniele seems to have other priorities on her mind. There's something else she wants to spend her money on.
I get frequent readings done by my spiritual advisor, Baba. Today, I arranged for Yohan to have his own reading with Baba because I know that Yohan and I ultimately want the same things.
Yohan does his best to humour Daniele. Keep in mind, Yohan is a devout Christian. He doesn't understand or agree with Daniele's beliefs. In fact, he's previously told us he sees her beliefs as witchcraft. But Daniele is adamant that these readings performed by her spiritual advisor will help the two of them get back on track, will help them move past their differences. So they hop on a video call with Baba and Daniele's friend and mentor who introduced her to the Ifa tradition. Yohan seems to be on board, and he actually seems excited at the idea of getting a reading. That is, until it starts.
Está bien, me gusta esa idea, vamos a darle.
Okay. Daniele
explains that Baba is using a chain with knots tied into it to come up with his readings. However the chain falls, that will determine the advice he gives. And as the ritual starts, Yohan gets more and more lost. He has no idea what's going on. Baba tells Yohan that he was apparently born with a crown on his head. But in order to realise that life is sweet, he needs to eat more sweet things, like honey. And then he goes on to say,
that he has to be careful of bones, eating bones from fish, and also being careful with mushrooms.
For someone who doesn't follow the Ifa tradition, who doesn't know what's really going on here, Yohan seems as lost as I guess any of us would be. This seems like random advice. Even Daniele, who's a believer, who for example refuses to now wear any black clothing on Baba's advice, seems confused by what Baba's saying. Just look at her face when Baba warns Yohan against eating mushrooms. As for Yohan, well, he's struggling to take what he's heard seriously.
Los consejos que me da Baba son algo raro.
So why exactly did Daniele organise this reading? Well, that becomes clearer after the call ends. It seems like Daniele expected Yohan's life to change. She expected him to convert to her religion. That despite the fact that she knows he's a devout Christian. Now, the way that Daniele approaches this subject, the way that she goes about trying to see if Yohan is willing to follow the Ifa tradition, comes across as incredibly rude.
¿Tú quieres una religión?
Tengo una religión. Mi religión está aquí. Le oro a Dios y le pido a Dios, necesito, Él me ayuda en mi religión.
Look at the disrespect there. Look at Daniele smiling as though somehow Yohan's answer is ridiculous. She's looking at him as though she thinks he's an idiot for thinking his religion is real and hers isn't. It just goes to show the stark contrast between Daniele and Yohan. Yohan sat patiently through all of that. When asked what he thought about Baba, he chose to pick out traits that he respected about him.
¿Qué tú piensas de Baba?
Yo pienso de Baba, una buena persona, muy espiritual, con mucho conocimiento y me cayó bien.
So yeah, while Yohan treats Daniele and her beliefs with respect, Daniele is once again trying to control Yohan and force her beliefs onto him. The way she's happy to completely disregard his religion, the way he feels, the way he's been brought up his entire life, shows a staggering lack of respect. And that implied expectation that Daniele felt that Yohan would probably convert his religion after one call with Baba seems to have baffled Yohan.
No sé si Daniel estaba pensando en que yo iba a aceptar su religión así. Tú eres feliz con tu religión, yo soy feliz con la mía.
It was gender roles yesterday, and it's religion today. I suppose the only good thing that we can say about this is at least these guys are having the big conversations. But are they actually getting anywhere? Now, speaking of gender roles, that's about to come up again in a very big way, because the electricity just went out. Yohan says that that's pretty normal in the DR, but he also reveals that the electricity bill hasn't been paid.
Hay que pagarle la luz.
¿Tú necesitas pagar? You didn't pay for the light?
Tú necesitas.
As expected, as anyone would, Daniele doesn't take this news too well. Yohan's had all this time to prepare the apartment for her arrival, and he hasn't bothered to pay the electricity bill. This right here is proof that Yohan seems reliant on Daniele and her money. Instead of just paying for it himself, he waited for her to come so that she could pay for it. So, while I definitely agree that Daniele has a lot of faults, Yohan isn't perfect either. His traditional view on gender roles has to be taken with a grain of salt when we see that he's more than happy to let his wife pay for everything. You've got to imagine that's not going to sit too well with Daniele.
Tú sabes, yo no tengo luz hoy, y tú no dices nada. This is just another example of how Yohan is not really likely to take a ton of initiative to create the life that he wants.
Now, while I agree that Yohan's behaviour raises certain questions, like why can't he just pay for it himself, I actually don't agree with Daniele's take. I don't agree that this shows a lack of initiative to build the life he wants, because we know that Yohan is working hard. He's got multiple jobs. He is trying to build himself a new life. I guess Daniele just needs to appreciate that money doesn't come that easy in the DR. While he is working hard and he is making money, the money he's making isn't that much, especially by American standards. So if Miss Moneybags over here is happy to pay for everything, happy to spend her money on video calls with spiritual leaders who tell you not to eat mushrooms, well then he'd be a fool to look that gift horse in the mouth, wouldn't he?
This is not how I wanted my life in Dominican Republic to begin.
Perhaps not, Daniele, but here's a thought. Maybe you should have taken more initiative when you were last in the DR. Instead of spending all that time arguing, why didn't you put more effort into finding somewhere to live that you would be happy with? You could have even made one of those fancy spreadsheets you seem to love so much to plan out when your bills would be due, how much you'd owe. You know, be organised like you say you are. But instead, it's much easier for Daniele to blame Yohan than to take any responsibility herself. Now, the pair decide to put this argument on pause for the time being, because today is their 1-year anniversary since they met. This means it's time to go out to celebrate.
Today is the 1-year anniversary from when Yohan and I first met. I think in a year, so much has changed in our relationship. We've learned a lot about each other over the course of this last year.
Yeah, she's not wrong there. A lot has changed. They have learned a lot about each other. They got married, they moved in together. Daniele shattered Yohan's dreams of moving to America. Yohan found out that Daniele is very controlling and disrespectful. Daniele found out Yohan wants a more traditional woman and can't really afford her lifestyle. Yohan found out Daniele doesn't see his religion as a religion.
I feel like we have a lot to celebrate.
Right, okay, so while Daniele wants to celebrate their wins, and there aren't a lot of them, she also takes this opportunity to ask Yohan what he would change about her. Does she have any traits that he doesn't like? You just know that this conversation is a bad idea. It's a can of worms that she shouldn't be opening. I mean, Daniele isn't the sort of lady that seems to take criticism well. She always finds a way to flip it and blame the people around her.
Tú tienes que cambiar tu forma de expresarte. Tú te enojas de todo y gritas y lloras. Eso no está bien.
Out of all of the big issues that these two have, this one is obviously the one that's hurt Yohan the most. He's been insulted multiple times by the things that Daniele said when she's angry. She's called him stupid, toxic, she said that he's not a man. Whenever she gets mad, she speaks without really thinking about the consequences. Yet, in previous episodes, she's the one that has the audacity to say he acts like a child.
It feels like I'm dealing with a child. When he gets to a place where he's defensive, it's like the conversation goes nowhere.
Yeah, you might want to look in the mirror, Daniele. Now, to her credit, Daniele does accept this critique from Yohan, and she acknowledges that this is something that she needs to work on. But now, it's her turn to tell Yohan what she'd like to change in him.
Tú no te gusta cuando tengo amigos es hombres, pero yo quiero tú cambias.
Pero a ti no te gusta yo tenga amigas mujeres. Entonces, tiene que ser igual.
This is the first time we're hearing about this. It seems like Yohan doesn't like Daniele having male friends. Now, I don't know if that's because of his traditional upbringing, or maybe it's because Daniele doesn't like him having female friends. But regardless, these two are too old to be having rules like this, and they both seem ready to meet halfway.
Okay, ¿qué?
Ok, tú puedes ir con tus amigas y yo puedo ir con mis amigos.
Bueno, no hay ningún problema.
Perfecto.
Something doesn't seem right here. When have these two ever been capable of being so mature? Well, don't worry, because within seconds we get to see what Danielle's hidden agenda really is. Why has she been so willing to compromise? Within seconds of their agreement, she asks Yohan if she can see her ex. Call me a cynic, but it's almost as if she planned and engineered this entire conversation on their anniversary, may I remind you, so that she could make plans to go and see another man.
Taylor es mi amigo de Miami, vivir en mi casa.
Porque tú tuviste novio.
No mi novio, tengo relación en el pasado, sí.
Danielle, I don't think Yohan could care less what labels you had. All that matters to him, whether or not you guys chose to call yourself boyfriend and girlfriend, is the fact that you lived together and you were together. Now, it's one thing to agree to hang out with friends of the opposite gender, but I don't recall that agreement extending to people you also used to sleep with. It's not unreasonable for Yohan to feel uncomfortable with this. But, as usual, surprise surprise, Danielle's going to try and make Yohan look like the bad guy here.
Quiere ir a un almuerzo con los dos.
¿Conmigo?
Sí.
Quiero otra cerveza.
Okay, so at least it's not just the two of them, right? But is it normal to get lunch with your husband and your ex-boyfriend? Now, I've got no doubt that there will be someone in the comments that say they go out with their ex and their husband all the time. But let's just agree that when there's no kids involved, that's not the norm. Now, to her credit, it does seem that when her ex slid into Danielle's DMs, she handled the situation well. She immediately let him know that she's now married and that she'd ask her husband if he'd be okay with them meeting up. That is the right way to handle this. It's a respectful thing to do and the bare minimum you'd expect from your partner.
Yo quiero tú tienes, mi amigos es tu amigos y tu amigos es mi amigos.
No quiero tu amigo, y más si tú tuviste relación con él.
I 100% agree with Yohan here. That's not what they agreed to a moment ago. Friends and exes that are now friends are not the same thing. Like it or not, there's a history there that transcends friendship. But Danielle doesn't seem to see it that way. Now, I'd love to see how Danielle would react if Yohan were to propose the same situation in reverse. But something tells me she wouldn't be comfortable with it either.
Yo quiero tú sientes cómodo.
Mira, no me voy a sentir cómodo. Tú querías ver a tu amigo, tú te estás volviendo loco, ¿o qué? De verdad que me quillado con eso.
The truth is, Danielle doesn't really care about Yohan feeling comfortable. She just wants him to say he's okay with it, when he clearly isn't. Yohan explains to Danielle that if she feels like she still needs this friendship in her life, to a point where they need to meet up, well, then she's making that relationship more important than the one with her and Yohan. And to be fair, Danielle seems to keep changing up just how important her ex is to her. It's no wonder that Yohan is feeling insecure.
Taylor was a really important part of my life a few years ago, and we still keep in contact every once in a while just to see how the other one is doing.
At first, Danielle says that he was a really important part of her life, but that they only kept in contact every once in a while. But then, later, he becomes a very important person to her, and that's why she wants him to meet Yohan.
Porque cuando una persona es importante a mí, es importante te gusta él, porque tú eres más importante.
So which is it, Danielle? Is he an old fling that you barely talk to? In which case, why is it so important that you need to meet him? Or is he immensely important to you, to a point that you want to meet him and you want him to approve your new husband? Because it really can't be both. I think judging by how keen Danielle is to push the issue, even when Yohan says he's not comfortable with it, it's likely to be the latter of the two options, don't you think?
Tú vas con un amigo
With my friend.
que fue tu novio. Tú estás loca. ¿En qué mundo tú vives?
Yohan really doesn't understand why Danielle would want to do this. He said himself that he doesn't hang out with any of his exes. It's incomprehensible to him why Danielle would ever want to. Perhaps that's their cultural differences coming into play, because although definitely not common, it does happen in the Western world. But, as Yohan explains, in the DR, something like this would be unheard of.
No es loca mi país.
Aquí La cosa es muy diferente. Somos diferentes culturas. Eso yo quiero que tú entiendas.
There's a part of me that wonders whether this has something to do with Yohan's image, how he's perceived by his community. In the last episode, Daniele explained that Yohan wanted to drive because
He feels like if anybody saw us on the road with a woman driving and a man in the passenger seat with all these suitcases, they'd like call him a.
So that being the case, imagine how Yohan would feel if people saw his wife, a lady who no doubt already stands out within the community, not least because there's camera crews following her around, but imagine if she was seen going for a drink with another man. The gossip would be endless.
Entiendo, pero tú tienes una esposa americana.
Tú eres una mujer casada. Eso es mucha falta de respeto de tu parte.
And that's exactly it. It is a huge lack of respect, but that can pretty much sum up how Daniele's been treating Yohan up until this point. So how far is Daniele going to take this? How adamant is she that she must see her ex-boyfriend? And if she does, will Yohan have finally had enough?